Hey, what is happening everyone? Welcome back to another video, and today we have ourselves 5 different soldering irons at 5 different price points from Temu. This is an idea I had for a while, they got in touch, and I was like, you know what, why not? So here we are with a collection of tools, but that's not all, because we also got ourselves a compact power delivery charger to power some of these soldering irons. And of course, we can not forget the basics of flux and solder, some basic tools, and if you're a beginner, don't worry because there are some fun, affordable practice project boards where they come with all the electronics, alongside with the instructions, to turn something like this into something like this. So you don't have to worry about destroying whatever main project you have, such as possibly your PSP. Because again, as I mentioned before, the next set of mods we'll be doing are going to require to know how to solder. And we cannot move forward unless you know how to. So expect a follow-up to this video. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So yeah, this is a nice beefy charger. This thing was priced at around $24, and it can actually do quite a lot. So what we got here is a 200 watt GaN charger. And if you don't know what GaN is, basically it's a gallium nitride technology that allows us to make some powerful chargers in a very small compact form factor, which is awesome, especially for laptop users. And I think that's pretty awesome. And what we're after here is primarily the 100 watt power delivery port. And yes, we'll in fact test this out with a power meter and see if it actually pushes out the correct outputs. So for now, we'll put that aside, alongside with the manual and the 2-prong power cord. Alright, so now let's quickly get the boring stuff out of the way. We got a $7 roll of solder that has a rosin core, so it has built-in flux as you solder, just a tiny bit to kind of get things going. A $1.40 solder wick, 60 cents of super thin copper wire, a $1.80 of another type of solder, and lastly a third brand of solder for $2.75. And don't worry, in just a bit we'll talk about the basics of soldering and what you actually need and how to go about it. So just bear with me. And like I said in the intro, we have 3 different PCB projects that are pretty cheap to get your hands on, come with all the components, and these are going to be a fantastic crucial part of kickstarting your soldering journey. They give you the opportunity to test out things, and hey, they're so cheap that it doesn't matter if you actually succeed or not. If you do end up making it work, fantastic. If not, you gained yourself a ton of experience just by attempting to do any of this stuff. So we'll take a look at them after we're done unpacking everything so we can test the soldering irons on them. And before we start unpacking the soldering irons, yes, we'll be testing out each one to see how hot they can get and see if the readings are accurate. So with that, let's start unpacking the $5 iron. So this is one of the cheapest ones I found on Temu, and for how cheap it is, it gets bundled with quite a lot. So let's take a look. So first we got a pair of tweezers and a little brush, a very cheap iron holder. Basically you're supposed to just bend this upwards and simply lay your iron on it like this. A dry sponge that you're supposed to wet to actually clean up the tip of your iron. We'll show you how it works. A solder vacuum, and while a blob of solder is hot, you can go ahead and just suck it out like that. And then once you press it again, it should spit out the solder that it took in. It also comes included with a nice bundle of solder. We'll see how good this stuff is. 5 extra tips of varying styles. And finally, the iron itself. So on the tip here, it's got a little protection rubber, so we'll just remove it. It comes with a tiny little dial right here that lets you change the temperature with these extremely tiny letters. And finally, a cheap cable that if you tug too hard, it's probably going to rip the guts out of it. Now personally, I'm not a big fan of these cartridge style tips. I have used them in the past and I really didn't like them, especially when you want to change a tip. So what you have to do is like unscrew this part, but it's too tightly on there. So you got to get a pair of pliers to try and twist it off. And then you remove these 2 pieces, remove this tip, and that right there, by the way, is the heating element. Then you grab your new tip, you slide it on top, you put back in the retainer, and then you tighten it. Now you may be saying that looks all right, but you gotta remember, sometimes you have to do this while the iron is hot, and that's no fun. So you could burn yourself, and you will definitely need a pair of pliers to actually go through this. So anyways, that's a $5 iron, so we'll see how it performs. Now if you go ahead and double the price, you can get this iron for around $10, and this one has a nice display, runs off Type-C, and most importantly, has a better tip system. And to open the box, we're just gonna... It also comes with a nice case. So inside you get the manual, a tiny bit of cheap solder, a much better iron holder with a built-in tip cleaning dry sponge, a very short and cheap USB cable, and if you read the specs, it says it runs on 5 volts and outputs up to 10 watts worth of power, some high quality rosin, so you gotta manually dip something and put it on your PCB while you're soldering, and finally, we have the iron itself, alongside the single included tip. And to install it, you simply push it in, and you're pretty much good to go. A whole lot easier than the last one. And it seems like this one is actually battery powered, so maybe not as great as we thought, but we'll see. So this will definitely be one of the more interesting ones. And here's what the Type-C port looks like. The short USB cable makes a whole lot more sense now. Moving on, we have the $15 iron, and this one claims to do up to 90 watts worth of power from a brand called Ely Belib. Okay. Alright, so here's what we got. We got a manual, the same type of holder as the last one, with a sad piece of sponge, kind of reminds me of SpongeBob, the same type of annoying tips as the first one, the same type of solder as the first one, and a whole tub of flux. Yeah, I don't know why. So this time this one has a nice sleeve, so that's cool. Same tip changing mechanism, and looks like almost the exact same iron except it has a digital display. Same problem with the actual housing coming loose, but at least we have a nice digital display that comes with a built-in screen protector. And this time a proper grounded cable instead of this dingy little one. So we'll see how it performs. Next up we got this fancy looking one for around $38, and this one comes with a couple different bundles, but it seems like we only got the base package. And inside we get the manual, same type of iron holder, a decent Type-C to Type-C cable, that I think is plenty long. And finally, the iron itself. Let's remove this label right here. And I really don't know why they had to put this label. Yeah, that's annoying. All right, so there we go, much better. So this is the Zoe ZT-N1. We just gotta unpeel the protector here. It's got a nice built-in display. It's got very hard to press tactile buttons, so you don't accidentally press any of them. And this one doesn't just pop out. I think you gotta rotate it. Yep. It's got an aluminum body, which is nice. And this uses what's called a T12 tip, which is one of my favorite ones. They're pretty easy to put in and out. They're very cheap and affordable, and they usually work pretty well. This whole thing feels nice and sturdy, so it looks pretty promising. Yeah, it doesn't have any tips included with this specific bundle, but overall the tips are pretty easy to find and they're pretty affordable. And finally, we got the $47 iron. And this one comes bundled with a nice selection of T12 tips, and that would be from a brand called GVDA. It's got an OLED display, and of course some power saving modes to quickly turn on and off, and claims to do up to 96 watts worth of power. And inside of this bundle, we get a DC to Type-C converter, which I believe you could use with a 12 volt adapter, a decent amount of solder, another manual, the same extra cheap stamp metal iron holder as the $5 one, and finally what looks like the best Type-C cable that has been included out of all these irons. It's a Type-C to Type-C, and it's got a decent amount of length. So at first glance, it looks like this thing is like a protector or whatever, and it kind of looks cheap, but I think it is in fact intended to be used as a little grip. So I guess we're not throwing it away. Again, some unpeel therapy. Unpeel therapy denied. There we go. Here's what the Type-C port looks like. Nice aluminum build. This type of tip is secured with little screws, but overall it's much better than the first ones. And lastly, of course, we have the pair of tweezers, which are pretty standard, very affordable, and very handy. So now let's go ahead and jump into the mounting table, get a good view of this mat in all its glory, talk about the basics of soldering, and pretty much test out each of these irons with these cool practice boards. Alright, so here's what we currently have set up at the mounting table. We've got one of those generic work pads, and it's been doing the job pretty well. It's got little areas for where you can store your stuff, some space to put your tools, tons of space for your screws, with 3 magnetic spaces right here, and some part boxes, which I rarely use. Which is great if all you're doing is assemblies and reassemblies. However, if you're doing some soldering, it can get pretty dirty pretty quickly and really annoying to clean up. Not to mention that this surface is a dust magnet. So let's go ahead and remove it and install this fancy new one, which looks absolutely awesome. So let's go ahead and drop our parts here. Oh, that just looks beautiful. Of course, we cannot forget the detachable mat, which is going to be super handy. So at this moment, I already have an idea of what I want to do with this mat. I'm probably going to make these cutouts slightly bigger so I can just pop them in without having to do a bunch of, to get these to sit flat. Alright, so now that everything is in view, let's take a look at what we have here. So obviously we've got 2 screw collection points right here. We got 10 different part areas all around, plus 2 right here. For some reason they're not labeled. Maybe they thought number 10 looked better. And no, the circle here is not magnetic. Kind of weird. 3 different tool sections, as well as one of these things that hold your screwdrivers, which is cool. Of course, the removable surface. And I believe you can actually buy these parts separately. I think I saw a few listings where they were selling only this part. And finally, a ruler down here. And no, it is not detachable. And that's pretty much it for this work surface. If you haven't noticed, I'm mostly excited about this thing right here. It looks awesome, and it's going to look pretty cool on video. And yes, once again, it does come in different colors, including a cool orange. So you got that LTT look if you want. Alright, so enough of this. I've got our charger here all set up and ready to go. So we'll make sure to go ahead and test out the output with this little Type-C meter. So I'm just going to have it sitting here on the side for now. So we're going to take a look at the more expensive ones and work our way down to the cheapest one. But first, let's quickly talk about the basics of soldering. At its core, you need a soldering iron and some solder. But in order for these two to work optimally, you're going to also need yourself some flux. And what flux does is allow solder to flow freely to where you need it. Like your contact pad, soldering iron, whatever you're trying to get your solder to stick to, this will help it out. And when it comes to solder, there are 2 types, leaded solder and lead-free solder. And all you have to know is that the leaded solder is easier to flow, easier to use, and has a much lower melting point. Where lead-free solder is required for a lot of electronics nowadays for a number of compliance and safety issues. But both are perfectly fine to use as long as you know what to do. If you're a beginner, just go for leaded solder and things are going to be a whole lot easier. Just make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated area. Or get yourself one of those fume extractors. Alright, so at this point in the video, moving forward, things were getting a bit too convoluted. I was testing all the irons, their flux, the solder, and the project boards, and things were getting out of hand. So instead of wasting your time and confusing all the beginners, let me just give you the gist of it. So first we'll take a look at the irons themselves, grouping them into 3 different categories. The ones that run off mains, the ones that run on Type-C, and finally the battery-powered one, which happens to be the most surprising one out of the bunch. So make sure you stick around. Of course, we'll talk about the different solder that was included, as well as the solder that you can purchase separately, the different tip standards, the project boards, and yes, we'll give you some rough readings of the actual temperatures, and of course, testing out the power output of this charger. So let's get started with these two. At first glance, these two look very similar, and it may lead you to think that just one has a digital display, and that's about it. except there's actually quite a lot of difference, and here's a quick rundown. First off, the $5 one runs on this cheap cable. It doesn't have any fuses or a grounding pin. And to power it on, you basically rotate this dial until the LED comes on, which flashes in camera, but not in real life. And the label here happens to be misaligned, so for example, if you go ahead and rotate it all the way to the top, it only goes up to 400. So you probably want to go ahead and fix it. There we go. So I went ahead and set it to 300, and we can talk about the user experience. So first of all, this uses, of course, the cartridge style tips, which I absolutely hate. In the past, I've used them, and I really hated them. And the included tips are usually pretty bad, which you can tell by the heavily oxidized tip. And for reference, here's what the tips used to look like on the right, and what they look like now, after 10 minutes of usage. They now look like a World War relic. And of course, if you want to go ahead and change your tip, you're going to have to get yourself a pair of pliers and carefully remove it, like so, without of course burning yourself. Now speaking of heavily oxidized tips, how you're actually supposed to clean them up is by wetting the dry sponge and basically going about it like this. And what that will do is shock the metal and remove the thin layer of oxidization on your tip to prep it for your next soldering session. And for reference, we have it set to 300 after calibrating the label, and here are the readings. I would say it's decently accurate. Long story short, it's cheaply made, and I would highly recommend that you stay away from it. Yes, I was in fact able to do some surface matte soldering, but without the right type of solder and the lack of constant temperature control makes it a pretty bad iron in my opinion. Because as soon as you start soldering something, the temperature will drop and you'll have to wait a little bit for the iron to get back to temperature. Unless of course you crank the temperature all the way up, but that will come with its own issues, like drying out your solder in flux, and not to mention that the iron itself will get pretty warm to the touch. Yes, the included solder does work, but it's very smoky and leaves a thick layer of annoying flux to clean up. And trust me, it's not very easy to clean up. You can just take a look at this board here. And in my opinion, the only redeeming factor is actually the solder pump. This thing is actually pretty good. It works amazingly well, a whole lot better than this fancy one that I got recently. Moving on to the fancier version of it that runs around $15, and this one actually isn't that bad. First off, it comes with a grounded fuse plug, this time having a digital display that also has temperature control. The buttons here are nice and tactile, and they're not easy to press so you don't accidentally turn it on or turn it off. And although it's using the same cartridge style tips and having the same issue of the body rotating with the actual nut here, so you've got to open it up, you got to hold them together like this and rotate. The tips here, if you notice, even after cranking the temperature all the way up for 10 minutes, the tip here still looks in pretty good condition. And for comparison, here's what the tip looks like from the $5 one. And here's the temperature reading, we have it set to 300, and here's what we get. Yeah, it's way off. And if I was personally using it, I might drop it by 30 degrees. It does come with the same included solder as the last one, some cheap stuff that puts out a ton of smoke, and a whole lot of sticky flux. And cleaning the tip here gives a very nice clean result, and I'm honestly very impressed by the quality of the tips that are included. Yes, it's very inaccurate with the temperature readings, but at least it has a nice grip and a much higher quality set of tips. Again, personally, I would not use the included solder, and likewise with the included tub of flux that is included. Yes, it does get the job done, but will also leave a hard to clean up mess. And yes, I have used contact cleaner and 99.9% isopropyl alcohol, and yes, this project board is still an absolute mess. Overall, for around $15, I would say it's not a terrible soldering iron, but also not the one I would recommend for my viewers. For those who are watching outside the current audience, on this channel we're currently focused on PSP hardware modding, because this year we're finally tackling mods that are going to require you to know how to solder. So this is what the video is mainly for. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next set of irons. Alright, so next up we have these two Type-C irons. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and plug in this GAN charger and give you a quick rundown. So the main port we're actually looking to use is the first one here, that can do up to 100 watts of PD power. We have quick charge on the bottom and regular oil 20 watts, but again, the main one we're after is the 100 watt. And that's probably what most people are actually looking for. So how well does it actually work? Well, I went ahead and tested it with these two things. One is a little power meter that allows me to trigger the PD charging at 100 watts, and this thing acting as a load tester. And the results were actually pretty decent. I did manage to actually get 100 watts, but that was at the cost of lower voltage, which tends to happen at a higher load, and I did actually manage to keep that load for a long period of time before I ended the test. And of course, it does have some safety features, so as soon as I went beyond 100 watts, it instantly shut off. Plus, this thing didn't heat up or produce any coil whine, and for the price point, I can't really complain. So with that in mind, let's get started by taking a look at this one. Here's what it looks like when it boots up. You press this button to turn it on, and there it goes. Very nice small display, tells you the current voltage that it's running at, the actual load on the Type-C port, and of course the temperature you have it set to and the current temperature, which is very nice. You can easily change the temperature like this, and if you press and hold both buttons you can enter the menu and change various configurations, including temperature calibration. So let's go ahead and set it to 300 and see what we get. We got a pretty nice accurate reading. The buttons here are easier to click than the other ones, however it does come with a nice little grip here that honestly looks kind of ugly because it's just a cheap piece of silicone. That is clear, so you can still see the logo. It does have a triangular shape, so when it comes to actual grip, this by far has the most natural and comfiest one. Very, very nice. What's not nice about it is that the included set of tips is basically a standard T12 tip that is shortened, just for this brand right here. Thankfully, you can actually still change the tip without burning yourself too easily. So we can just do that and pull it out. But we still have this little stupid nut right here to lock into place, which is handy, but at the same time, really not necessary. Because for comparison, here's what a standard T12 looks like, and you can get them in various different qualities, with various different price points very easily, nearly everywhere. The standard one is much longer, of course. As you can see, it is powering on with it installed. However, it now turned into a long cannon, and yeah, it's not the easiest one to control now. So yeah, changing the tips while the iron is still hot is definitely possible with just your bare hand if you're careful. But again, it's using some custom proprietary tips that are shortened just for this custom body. And other than that, the only other complaint that I have about this thing is the fact that the actual body gets pretty warm to the touch. And I think that's mostly because the tip here is much shorter than usual, and the heat can easily transfer back into the body, and it can get uncomfortable after long periods of time. Yes, the included solder does work, and if you have higher quality stuff, I'd recommend using it. Otherwise, the included stuff is pretty decent, but that's really about it. I personally would not use it. With this one, alongside with the included tips, you can pretty much do anything you want to do. You can do it all with this one. Overall, not a bad iron, does have pretty good performance, but of course, there are better options out there, so I would steer away from this one. Next up, we have the $38 one, and this one comes in different bundles, of course, just like the last one, and the one that we got here comes with a single tip. Thankfully, it does use a standard T12 tip, so you get the full length, and no, this thing does not heat up like the last one, which is great, because I really like this iron. It's got a really nice cover, fantastic build quality. Here's what it looks like when it boots up. And this one allows you to actually change your settings before you go ahead and turn it on. Now the settings menu here is a bit limited compared to the last one, but it does have the basics. Celsius or Fahrenheit, calibration, sleep timer, pretty simple and straightforward. But that's really about all you need. So let's go ahead and turn it on. Now as you can see, the display here is slightly shifted to the left. It is still readable. And the nice thing about this one is that it does actually give you detailed information about the voltage readings. It's actually giving us the wattage and voltage readings as they are, and not just a simple label like the last one. And when it comes to the voltage, it sometimes drops to 19 volts. And we know that's accurate because that charger here sometimes drops below 20 volts. Overall, a very nice, useful display. The main tip holder here does have some cutouts to let the heat out from the bottom here and not let it fully transfer into the body. And it actually works pretty well. This thing is still cool to the touch, even though we're running at higher temperatures, and that's a win in my book. Nothing worse than remembering an old smartphone. Let's go ahead and drop it to 300 degrees and see what we get. Also, some pretty accurate readings. Very nice. This thing is in fact better calibrated than the more expensive one. Yes, the grip here is a bit too big. It is a square, so it's not as ergonomic as the last one, but still not bad at all. At least it's calibrated, uses standard tip types, doesn't heat up, and gives us some pretty accurate information on the display. So if I was personally to have one in my toolkit, this would definitely be one of them. And finally, we have my favorite iron, and that would be the battery-powered portable one. And this one has absolutely blown me away. Not only with its performance, ease of use, and overall value. So what do we have here? Well, it's got an 800 mAh battery, Type-C charging and power, because yes, even if it runs out of battery, you can always plug it in. A built-in display with preset temperature controls of 260, 300, 340, 380, and 420. And 420 happens to be my favorite one when I'm running in the battery-powered mode, which we'll talk about in just a bit. That being said, it uses standard C210 soldering tips, which are high-quality, easy to find tips, and most importantly, easy to actually change. So if you're looking to actually replace this part or get a different style, you can easily do so by finding it on almost any website. And it has 3 little cute LEDs on the front for those late night projects. The display here is limited. You can change it from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and it has a 10-minute auto shutdown timer. So what are the limitations of this thing? Well, first of all, it has a coil line, and that's honestly my biggest gripe, which as you can hear, can get pretty annoying if you're that type of person. However, the coil line starts going away after 340, and 420, it's pretty much silent. So it's definitely got some PWM heating element, if that's the right term for it. So knowing that it's battery powered with an 800 mAh battery, what's the optimal usage? Well, I just charged up, so let's go ahead and check the temperatures while it's set to 300, and it's relatively accurate. It just ran out of battery as well. I've only charged it for like 10 minutes because I'm re-recording this entire bit. So knowing that, what happens if we go ahead and plug it in and try to turn it on? Well, it's gonna work, this time with a louder coil line. So let's go ahead and see what temperatures we get this time. And as you can see, the numbers are going wild, overshooting the temperature by a lot. So if it's reaching almost 380 while set to 300, what happens if we go to 420 while it's also plugged in? And by the way, the temperature here is actually just an animation. Even if you cool it down, it doesn't slow down, it's just there for looks. Let's find out what we get this time. Well, we have certainly went way beyond for what a cheap battery-powered soldering iron should get to. And the body is slightly getting hot, of course. It's charging up, also disposing a bunch of power, so that's to be expected. So once you have it fully charged, which usually takes around 2 hours for these type of things, I think the expected runtime could be anywhere from around 15 to 25 minutes. Of course, depending on the temperature they have it set to. So the best way I can actually recommend that you use this thing is to just get a feel for it and see how well it melts the solder that you have on hand, and then just leave it at that temperature. How I find myself using this thing is probably setting it to 420 at all times when it's on battery power, use it for a little bit, touch up what I need to do, and then just simply shut it off. Because all I'm going to be using this thing for is for quick jobs, and that's about it. And for those quick jobs, this thing is absolutely phenomenal. Quick jobs include like dual analog stick mod, LED mods, almost everything we're going to be doing moving forward. And all I can say, the experience of using this thing wirelessly is as liberating as going from a wired VR headset to a wireless one like the Quest. It's night and day difference. It's definitely an experience to be had. So overall, in my opinion, if you're using it wired, set it to 300 and leave it as is. If you find your tip cooling down too quickly, set it to 340. And of course, make sure you monitor the heat, because who knows, these things are cheap and it does have an internal battery, so just be careful while using it. If it's fully charged, you can start off with 300. If you start noticing your tip is getting too cold too quickly, honestly, just bump it up to 420 and finish your project real quick. On battery powered, it should last you just enough to finish your project. Out of everything that we have reviewed here, this is by far my favorite soldering iron. And in second place, it would have to be this one right here. If you're looking for more expandability, this thing can do it, but again, this thing is no slouch as well. And of course, how can we forget the included case here? Definitely a lot of value for your money. Except, don't use this stuff, throw it away. The included holder is pretty decent. The wire here you can remove and replace with other tips in the same amount of space. And lastly, the high quality rosin, just don't use it. And if you want to be extra safe, go ahead and store it separately from your tip. That way, even if accidentally turns on, it doesn't actually heat up anything. And lastly, we can talk about the project boards. So when it comes to these things, they come in different styles and prices, and they can be found pretty much everywhere. They're fantastic for learning, and they're pretty cheap to get your hands on. Now this one is about $7, not so much. Even though the end product here is more functional, it's not exactly the type of work we're going to be doing, but still plenty of fun to get the basics through. As for these other style boards, they're all made up of surface mount components, or SMDs. You can get them for around $2 each, and they're mostly going to be containing the stuff we're going to be doing moving forward on this channel. And again, don't expect to actually finish the project, don't expect it to work. All you're here for is to learn how to solder without learning how to do it on your main projects or something expensive. Like this one is very basic actually. All you have is a bunch of LEDs that turn on and go around in circles, and I'm pretty sure everything here on the side is just there for you to practice on. If I remember correctly, it doesn't actually connect to the main components here. In terms of actual function, this will work. Everything else on the side and on the back is purely there for practice. And as you can see here, you have the different sizes of components, so you can definitely get some good practice in here. Again, make sure you got your solder wick, so if you screw something up or you have too much solder, you can easily clean it up and start over again. And likewise with this other one, it's pretty much the same story. Very basic LEDs and a ton of play space to practice on. So overall, definitely get yourself one of these things, some of these in flux, solder, and solder wick, this set of tweezers, and just maybe this little jumper wire, just in case. And with all that being said, that is all for this video. Links for everything will be in the description down below. And the last thing we can talk about here is how actually Temu operates. So one thing I've noticed about their website is they have a lot of items and a lot of listings. Usually listings of the same item in different descriptions, styles, titles, and price points. And what I've noticed is they usually do limited stock to try and pull your leg into buying it before it runs out of stock. Sometimes something will have like 5 left, 3 left, last one, kicking your phone into full gear and trying to get you to buy it. So that's one thing. Another thing is that the price points fluctuate a whole lot. So sometimes they're cheaper, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're cheaper only for you to actually use a coupon that they are offering you. So originally this video was going to be sponsored, I was going to get paid, but I'm like, you know what? No. In fact, the links that they gave me, I won't be making anything other than the revenue from this video. So this is kind of a video to kind of gauge the interest. I already had this idea to do it for AliExpress, but they got in touch and I was like, you know what? Why not? Let's see how it goes. So yeah, if you're interested and you've never shopped on Temu, they actually did give me a coupon that would give you $100 worth of coupons that you could use. Of course, terms and conditions included, but essentially that code, you put it in the search bar, you search it up, then it will activate the coupon bundle for your account, among other discounts, including some of these items. And that's really about it. In the past, I have used Temu. It worked. From what I heard, it does have some pretty good return policy, but if you have experience with it, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And just one last thing about Temu, for some people around the world, it might be their only option, and sometimes the faster option over alternatives, as they may have a local warehouse. So in that regards, it's pretty useful. Other than that, you already know. Anyways, that is all for this video. If you have enjoyed this video, do let me know. Hit the like button, subscribe, comment, and let me know if you want to see an AliExpress version of this video. We can definitely do it. There are plenty more options online at various different price points, and I'm very interested to check out some more battery-powered ones because they're going to be perfect for the type of projects they're going to be working on moving forward, and I think they're going to be a great option for beginners for how much value they pack for the price. So anyways, that is all for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.